speaker is Jerry Fochtman, and he's going to talk to you about Dr. Daniel W. Valentine. He was an early postage and fractional currency and half-dollar pioneer.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to explore a little bit about Dr. Valentine. We're going to go into some of his background because that's the intent of what I wanted to get into. So the agenda I'm going to cover is like why. Why did I do this? Well, I was actually looking for something. And I explored Valentine and learned a lot more than I ever anticipated. So I ended up getting into his family life, his early years, his background, if you will, some of his history with the New York Numismatic Club itself, his publications, which was the basis for why I got into it, right? And what happened to the family? So you become kind of a genealogy detective. And if you've ever tried doing that, it can be very tough. Researching and stuff, there's a lot of it online now, but for a long time there's not been very much available. So in search of a picture, I was trying to find a picture of Dr. Valentine. All the records I found, there was this picture. This was the first New York Numismatic Club dinner held at the Hotel McAlpin, if you will, in January 1913. Dr. Valentine's in this picture. Does anybody know which person it is? You can pick out a few people in here, I'm sure. Like this is Fred Boyd, Chapman, Fry. Those are the easy ones that I can find. But Valentine's right there. He's in the back. He's sitting with his wife, Adabelle. Not a real good picture of him, is it? Keep looking. Ah, another picture. A&S dinner, 1917. You'd have thought the photography would have improved a lot in the intervening years, but no. Dr. Valentine is sitting in here. He's the one person that's not looking at the camera. So, it's right there in the background behind the gentleman with the white mustache. Not a very good picture. So now the search goes on. This is all that I could find in the numismatic realm. So I decided I needed to go see if I could find something from the family and the descendants. So that's why I got into all this genealogy search. Dr. Valentine's father was Charles Valentine. He married Sarah Fleetwood Valentine in 1860. They had their first son was Charles Fleetwood, and then Daniel. They had two boys. In 1867, the family actually moved from New York City to Englewood, across the river, if you will. Englewood was recently established. It was a fairly young community. Charles Valentine opened up a real estate office because there was lots of land to sell, and also a general store, a hardware store. That's an advertisement in one of the local papers of the time for his hardware store. Daniel worked in the hardware store as a clerk as a young teenager. This was after the Civil War, and the tokens that proliferated during the Civil War time period and leading up to it were valueless. So a clerk had to know the difference between a token and a coin and everything else. And also, fractional currency was still in circulation. So he had to learn quickly how to examine a customer's change and pick out the right coin, the value, or he might have heard from Dad when he got home that night. Fractional currency, but it was rapidly disappearing because coin was being minted at that time. He attended both public and private schools. This is a picture of the private school that became a home eventually. So that's what it looked like in about 1930. This was Englewood's first public school, where Daniel had attended. The family also are participants and attended the local Presbyterian church. And this is a drawing of that first church in Englewood, New Jersey. He also joined a local baseball team. He was a member of the Pioneers. And they played another group of local boys called the Inglewoods. Does anybody know or would care to guess which one's Daniel Valentine? You remember, he did have a mustache, right? He didn't have it then. That's Daniel Valentine as a youth baseball player. Baseball, isn't that old in the 1880s. He attended the New York College of Dentistry. He graduated with a degree in dentistry in 1887. And here's the graduation list. Following graduation, he went to Vienna and continued studying in Vienna for a little over a year. And then he returned to New York City and actually opened his practice in New York City. About 5-6 years later, he moved his practice across the river back to Englewood. I don't know whether he lived in New York during the time his practice was there or if he lived in Englewood and commuted. Now let's look at his future wife, Ada Belle. Ada Belle Callwell was born in 1863. She was the third child of Benjamin Callwell and Sally Orr of both Couters Point, PA, and Portville, New York. He was in the lumber business and he moved around a bit. She attended public schools and then she studied at Elmira Female College. And she graduated with honors as a teacher. This was her mother's, her mother wanted her to get into teaching, so that's the field that she studied. And then she began teaching in Olean, New York. And I don't know where Olean, New York is. Or the south, north, or wherever. Western. Her father, Benjamin Callwell, was in the lumber business. And in 1884, he moved the family to Harrisville, Michigan. Harrisville, Michigan is on Lake Huron on the east side of Michigan. To join the rest of his family in the lumbering business. Now, a few years prior to that, there was a small fire in Chicago, so the lumber business was doing pretty good. And Michigan was still a lot of old growth timber. And the Caldwell family owned something like 4,000 acres of old growth timber. However, Ada Belle moved to Englewood at the urging of a good friend that she had, Catherine Jones. That's where we speculate that she finally met Daniel. A lot of this information comes out of the social notes that are in the various local papers. You get things about so-and-so's going to visit somebody or has returned from a trip and things like that. They published a lot of that during that time. So you kind of, if you're a busybody, that's where you got all your information. And then she taught in Englewood for about a year and she got ill. So she moved back to the rest of her family in Harrisville, Michigan. After she recovered there, she became a school teacher in Harrisville, Michigan. And there's actually records showing her as a teacher in that school. Now, I surmise, we didn't chase all the social pages, but I surmise that she kept going back and forth to visit her friend Catherine Jones, allegedly. But she had met Daniel, and she was also traveling back to see him. Because in October of 1896, there's record that Daniel and his best friend, Harry Mabey, traveled from Englewood to Harrisville, Michigan to get married. And on October 28th, they were married in Harrisville, Michigan. at the Presbyterian Church there. And here's the marriage record of the state of Michigan. Bottom line, Daniel Webster Valentine, Ada Belle Callwell. He was from New York, dentist. Father C.W. Valentine, mother Sarah Fleetwood, and Ada Belle from Harrisville, Benjamin Callwell, and Sally Orr.
Sorry, where'd you get that image from?
It's from an archive in Michigan,
Cool.
out of a library, one of the libraries. The family and guests attended a reception at the home of George Callwell, which was really a mansion. They called it the Callwell Mansion at the time. And here's a picture of it as it exists today. Now, it's an interesting story behind this. This mansion, if you will, is about 2 blocks off of Lake Huron. Between the mansion and the lake was a rail line. Down the rail line a bit was Callwell's lumber mill. And out in front of the house into the lake were docks. So basically that's how lumber was brought to his lumber mill there, right near the house, and it was cut up, shipped out on the docks. And this was the mansion. The top of the mansion actually had a widow's walk. You know what a widow's walk is? You see them primarily in New England, actually. And it's a little room on the top of the house where they used to say that the wife of the house would go watch for her husband to return from the sea. Well, there was a widow walk on this house, but in the 1950s, because of the structural weight, they had to remove it. So they took and used a crane and lifted it up off the house and set it down on the ground. It's in the backyard of the house, I believe. It's still there. But George Callwell, that's where he surveyed his estate. He could see the lumber yard, he could see the shipping docks, he saw the train. That was his office. It was kind of an interesting office. Now, I talked to the proprietors of that. At the time, it was a bed and breakfast. You see the bay window there on just to the left of the sign. In old houses and bay windows, they put a what usually? It was a window seat in there. If you ever grew up in an old house, there was a lot of times a window seat, and you always lift up the window seat and you hid stuff inside there, right? Well, the proprietor told me that on the underside of that window seat, Ada Belle had carved her name, and it was still there. Since then, that's become a private residence. But she said, and I told her a little bit about it, and she was quite proud of the fact that it was Callwell's. So following the wedding, a lot of information about that. I've been meaning to go to Harrisville one time when I'm back in Michigan and look it up. Dr. and Mrs. Valentine traveled back to Englewood, where they lived for the next 35 years. Now let's explore the Valentine family from this point forward. They had a daughter, Marion Catherine. She was born in 1897. And they had another daughter, Margaret, born in 1899. In early 1907, there's records, a lot of scarlet fever was happening. And people were very scared about these things. And Margaret became quite ill, and there were already 30 cases of scarlet fever in Englewood. So they quarantined the Valentines. Now, it was interesting, but the Board of Health there quarantined the house, and I think Daniel was allowed to come and go, but obviously nobody was allowed to enter the house. Dr. Valentine had 4 physicians come from New York and examine the daughter, and they all swore that she did not have scarlet fever. So he ended up suing the Board of Health for false imprisonment, which I thought was kind of an interesting approach. And the suit was lost even after they appealed all the way to the New York Supreme Court. And he sued for false imprisonment because the Department of Health never, ever examined the daughter. They had never visited. They just quarantined him based upon rumor. Now, maybe they were scared. They didn't want to go because they didn't want to catch scarlet fever. Nonetheless, he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. But by that time, Margaret had recovered. But it was the principle of the thing, I believe. It was a man of principles. Dr. Valentine was quite active in the community. He was involved in a number of local organizations. He joined the Masons, the Elks. This suggests to me it was at least I don't remember much about the Masonic Lodge, but I think you had to be, a 30 level Mason to get into an Elk Lodge? I should know that because my dad was a 36 level Mason, but I don't know it. He was involved in the First District Dental Society in New York City, the New Jersey State Dental Association, and the National Dental Association. This I thought was a little odd. He was also on the board of directors for a railroad. And I know nothing about the Coney Island Gravesend Railroad Company, unless it's what now we know as the Coney Island line. He joined the New York Numismatic Club in 1910 and remained active member of that club until his death. He joined ANA in 1912, and he actually published an interesting and put on a paper, and it's published in the ANA Numismatist, and I can't remember, is it 1912 or 1914? There's an interesting article he published. He was appointed chair of the New York Numismatic Club's Paper Money and Publications Committee. And he was elected as president of the New York Numismatic Club on 2 different occasions, in 1918 and 1920. As you know, the New York Numismatic Club has a tradition of generating a medal on behalf of a former president of the club. And here's his medal. It was designed by J.M. Swanson. The reverse was redesigned after this medal was issued. So this was the last one that the club issued with this reverse. And they struck 8 silvers and 50 bronze medals. That's how many of this particular one was produced. With help from a couple other NYNC members, we spent some time trying to do a census. And the census we conducted on the known copies of the medal that still exist said there's 2 silver that exist, and there's 12 bronze that can be found. Now there may be more, but we spent probably close to 1.5 years searching for them. And that's all we could come up with. We think that's why people tell us that this is the most difficult one that they produce to find. It's been known as if you're going to collect a complete set, it's been known as the key to the set. And the club itself only recently found one for the club. Now the club has a set. The New York Numismatic Club membership felt that it was important to produce a book on fractional. There had been no comprehensive list or study done to date on that. Now, Russell Down wrote an interesting paper on it that's been used. It's actually a series of papers he wrote in the 1890s, I believe, which is very good. But that was the only other item that was written on it. In 1913, they announced that they were going to assume that project and do that, because they wanted to make sure they had a guide, and they were trying to also get a good handle on, what is this? The book was to have notes from the Valentine and Postage collections as its basis, along with Russell Brown, Lyman Lowe, Robert Earl, and there were actually others. I think Fred Boyd had notes that they used. there were quite a few others. Remember, some of the the Wilcox and Friedman collections had been sold at that point, and most of those notes are still consolidated within a couple of people. So in 1924, with the backing of Fred Boyd as publisher, the book entitled Fractional Currency in the United States was actually published. Look, it took him 9-10 years to do this. This is the announcement that they put in just before the publication, where Fred was advertising the book. They were going to issue a limited number of deluxe copies, which were leather-bound copies, and 225 copies of the black-red one. There's the black one, the leather-bound, okay? There were 25 planned, according to a letter that Fred Boyd wrote to M.L. Bissell in 1928. He had only issued 15 of them. There are 4 that we know of that still exist. The one that's here was Julius Guttag's. It was emblazoned for him, so it was obviously pre-ordered. The black leather ones are interesting because they are hand serial numbered and hand signed by Valentine. And then the red-black edition, which is more prevalent, there were 225 planned. I ran a census, so if you've got one, send me the serial number. But we have accounted for 43 of them. And then the seconds and the extra printings, the print overruns and stuff, Mel bought from Fred Boyd and published this version. He called it the second printing. And the title's changed a little bit, but it still says Fractional Currency of the United States, which is what Valentine titled it, right? And then Durst came out with a reprint in 1981, and he changed the title. This says United States Fractional Currency by Daniel Valentine. So the title's been changed. I don't know if that was in error or intentional. Dr. Valentine's and the club's numbering system was quickly adapted, and it was used extensively until Robert Friedberg published his numbering system in the early 1950s. You can pick out Valentine's numbering system. It sometimes shows up on notes. Like in this case, it shows up as a 31A, and sometimes it shows up with a V in front of it to indicate it's a Valentine number. Such as in this note, it's got a V236 in the corner. They were penciled in by collectors or dealers and stuff so as to have the classification for the note. What happened to his fractional collection? Well, we don't really know. We know that beforehand, before this time, before he died, Boyd in the 20s sold most of his collections. So we have speculation, and it's been rumored that Schultz has a comment in one of his books about the Valentine collection, about Boyd getting the Valentine fractional collection. But we've not been able to find that comment. No records of dispersals or auctions. We know Boyd sold his collections, but he began another one soon after, and the speculation is, like I said, that he purchased Valentine's collection. His other collections. He had a complete collection of $1 gold. He had a very large holding of gold, foreign gold and silver, half cents, early dimes, Connecticut Granby cents, New York colonials, ancient. He had a lot of ancient coins from 750 BC through the Gothic kings. He was quite a prolific collector. They were all sold at auction by Thomas Elder over 3 days in 1927. So, we believe he sold his fractional to Boyd. We know everything else he sold to Elder. Through Elder, it got sold at auction. We're missing one. We're missing the half dimes. He had a very extensive collection of half dimes. He actually exhibited it at the ANS show in 1914. he had identified over 257 die varieties just in the Liberty seeded edition. And he had published this book. He wrote a book, his second book, on half dimes. It was published in 1931. But there's no record of whatever happened to his half dimes. Newspaper published an article on the fact that he had published this book. That's out of an Inglewood news local paper. And there's the book. Okay? Has anybody got these in your library? Then he's got one. So we don't know what happened to the half dime collection. And Mr. Half Dime doesn't know either. Dr. Valentine died at home in 1932 of a stroke at the age of 69. Here's the paper article. He was interred at his family's plot in Brookside Cemetery in Inglewood, New Jersey. In that plot is his dad, his mother, his dad's second wife, and Daniel. So what happened to the rest of the family? Ada Belle. Ada Belle moved to LA, California to live with her daughter, Marion. She passed away in February 1941 and is interred at the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale, California. And there's her grave marker. Marion. So both parents are gone. Let's go see what happened to the daughters. She moved to Hollywood in 1925, and she worked in the script department of a major studio. I've not been able to find out which studio it was, but she worked in a major studio in LA. She became engaged to the gentleman Don McKay, who was a talent agent, a quite well-known talent agent at the time, but there's nothing about any marriage, so we believe that the union never took place. But in 1944, she married a gentleman by the name of Paul Farrar, who was a highly decorated Army officer from World War I and World War II. Paul died in 1955, and Marion passed away in 1966, and she too is interred at Forest Lawn, and there were no descendants. So the family line stops. There's her marker in Forest Lawn. She's buried in a crypt. Marion V. Farrar. All right, Margaret, let's take the other path. Following her mom's path, she actually went into teaching. Through a friend, she met and married a gentleman by the name of Frank Beatty. I believe Frank Beatty was younger than her, and you'll see why. Together, they taught at Berkshire School, which is a private boarding school that still exists in Sheffield, Massachusetts. Peggy, as she's known, she taught art, and Frank taught music. Margaret died in 1965. Frank died in 1997. And they're interred together at the Sheffield Cemetery, and there were no descendants. Family line has kind of stopped. And there's Margaret's gravestone. And remember, we're looking for a picture, and we thought, okay, let's just chase the family, right? Family line stopped. No pictures, no way to find any kind of family album. So now what? Well, if you're in genealogy, you start going sideways, right? You go sideways. You start looking at everything else. You start looking at cousins. Caldwell family was actually pretty big. Associates. You start looking at the churches they may have visited. Because what you're trying to do is find out whatever happened to their material things. And the estates. If you can find who handled the estate, that may give you a clue as to where something may have landed if you're looking for something. Remember, we're looking for photographs. Frank Beatty, because Margaret had died in 65. He died in 97, so chasing Frank Beatty down. I found an associate who was a retired librarian from Berkshire Schools, and she remembered who was Frank Beatty's caretaker. Ah, okay, that may be a clue down here. Frank had given the caretaker some stuff in a metal box. Oh, this is getting interesting. Maybe there'll be something there. But no photo albums. Ah, darn. But the metal box. The metal box was from Charles Valentine's General Store in Englewood, Colorado. It's obviously out of the Valentine family. And it's a cash box. Pretty interesting. No photos, but pretty interesting, right? But guess what? There was a copy of his book on half dimes also. And look, it says from father. So this was obviously given to Margaret. And a sketch. There's a sketch of him. But look who did the sketch. J.M. Swanson, the same gentleman that designed the metal coin for the club. Oh, that's pretty good. Inside the book, there's another picture. They're hanging out in a hammock with a couple friends. And there's Dr. Ballentine, obviously later in life. Oh, I found a picture. All right, that's good. Hey, we're there. Let's keep looking. Marion, let's go look down the other side. Since Ada Belle and Marion were out in LA, I thought, and the Callwell family, which was a very large family, let's go chase that Callwell family down a little bit. And see if there's any other Callwells that might have been in the area because it's family. And I located a distant Callwell cousin in the LA area that remembers her when she was a little girl. Her and her mother, who was a Callwell, were friends, family, cousins. And they both liked to read. So when Marion died, her mother received a bookcase of books because they were prolific readers. Okay? And when her mother died, who got this from Marion, she got it. And she said there's some old photographs of Marion in the bookcase, and there's some pictures of other people she didn't know who they were. I said, well, get your daughter to scan them and send them to me. And they did. They're the old photographs. There's Marion. There's a young lady. Nice looking. Studio photograph. Oh, look what we found. There's Ada Belle, Marion, and Margaret. Right? See Ada Belle there? About the same time, 1910 or so. Okay, there's this other person that they didn't know who it was. There's the one thing we were looking for. A studio photograph of Dr. Ballentine. They did not know who it was. And when I saw it, I called her back up and I said, well, here's who these people are. So they were very, very pleased to get that information. And as a matter of fact, I bought a copy of Durst's book and sent it out to her. It says, this is why we were looking for this gentleman's photograph. So, found a picture. She still owns the picture. I only have a digital image of it. But did find it. Now, this was over 2 years worth of work chasing this stuff. Making phone calls, talking to people in Arizona and Michigan and California and Massachusetts and New Jersey. And I had Rick running to a cemetery out there in California finding gravestones for me. I had another friend up in New Jersey running to a cemetery to get a picture. So it's an interesting challenge. So if you ever get into this and you want to research somebody, you really have to sleuth. Is that right, Peter? So there's Dr. the towel off, and there's a box with Valentine's information in it. One of the things that's in the box that was rattling around that came from the lady in Massachusetts, which came out of Marion States, are Dr. Valentine's 2 medals. His medals are there, his silver and his bronze. So I have both his medals now. Any questions? A little bit of history. Wide journey, a lot more than numismatics, huh? Sometimes you find fascinating things.
Where's the cash box?
It's back there in a display case right there. You can see it when you walk out. That's all I have. I hope you enjoyed it.